I'm going to go through this quite quickly. I know the recording is going to be available for you guys later. I wanted to cram as much value as I could into this for you so you really get the most out of it. There's a couple of links to some other resources you can check out as well. I can make this presentation slides available for you. So if it seems too quick, apologies, but I want to make sure you get as much as you can, and you can always go back later to see it. So really, when we're talking about trust, we're talking about connection and really maximizing how well we connect with our patients, first of all. So to do that, we have to really think about, what do our patients want? And there's this great survey I saw a while ago. There's quite a few studies on this, but they basically went and they asked people, what do you look for in a healthcare practitioner? Like, what are the things you want to see when you're choosing a doctor or you're choosing a chiropractor? The first one that comes up, and this comes up top in every survey, is they want somebody who listens. They want a doctor who listens to them and makes them feel heard. And this is so key. This is what I want to focus on today, because you can be a great listener, but if your patients don't feel that, it doesn't count. And if they don't think you've listened to them, they're not going to trust you've done the right tests. They're not going to trust your diagnosis. They're not going to trust your plan. Why should they follow anything you've said if they think you haven't understood them at the start? Next one that comes up second to that is a doctor who cares, who demonstrates empathy. Now, listening's a great way to do that. And if you haven't listened to them properly, you can't empathize anyway. So it still relies on number one. Number three is a doctor who explains well. Now, my experience with chiropractors especially is this is what we want to know. This is what we get really hung up on, is how do I connect better with my patients? How do I communicate? How do I explain it well? What's the best report findings? What's the best metaphor? How do I get them to understand this? And I'm not knocking that stuff. That is important. But it's only one piece of the puzzle, and it doesn't count if you haven't listened well. So a lot of us focus on that talking element. We're putting the cart before the horse, really. We need to focus on listening first. Otherwise, that stuff's not really going to count for much. There's the reference that if you want to read the study, it's a very simple survey study. It's nothing too technical. Really interesting. There's some other things on there that came up that surprised me that people really look for in a healthcare practitioner. So it's worth looking at there. So if we're going to talk about listening, I think it's important first to talk about, why are we listening? So I'm having an edge over a bit here. What are we listening for? What's the whole point of it? When a patient comes in and starts telling us what's going on, what's our objective there? So, we obviously listen to understand, but what is it that we're trying to understand? Now, most people and most chiropractors and most of our patients expect that we're listening to understand the problem, right? We want to get to the diagnosis. We want to find out what's wrong with them, so then I know how I can help them and how I can explain to them how chiropractic care can help and things that they can do. And that's true. And I'm really not taking away from that. But I would argue more important than that is we need to understand the person. This is where empathy comes into it. This is where you can be a doctor who listens and a doctor who cares, because that's what patients are really looking for. And they're starved for empathy. They don't get this from healthcare practitioners. They don't get it, especially mainstream medicine and the NHS. I'm not knocking them, but they don't have the time or the resources to really connect with their patients. And if you can give that to them, you could be the best practitioner they've seen ever in the first visit. And that would be an amazing way to build that trust. And you will listen to diagnose. That's going to happen anyway. That will come up. So just give you a quick example of that. Here's a case study. We've all had patients like this come in and they go, it started a few weeks ago. I just woke up one morning, this horrible shooting pain in my neck. It was like someone jabbed a knife in there. Whenever I look up or whenever I turn my head, it's worse. It's better some days than others, but I don't know what I do that keeps injuring it. And lately my right arm's feeling sore. I'm getting these headaches. I'm exhausted. I'm irritable and snapping with the kids. And I'm nervous about driving. Looking to the right's painful. So I'm trying to use my shoulders because I don't want to damage it. So pretty typical initial history there. Now, if you're like most practitioners, what you immediately started doing, and it's, especially if you've been out for more than a couple of years, it was probably automatic, is you started zooming in on the diagnostic info. So they just woke up one morning. Did they sleep funny? What's their sleeping position? Maybe we're going to talk about that. So shooting pain. So it's not more like a muscle ache or that sort of thing. Turning their head or looking up, moving the neck makes it worse. Arm pain, headaches. We all know that's the kind of stuff that's going to stand out to us. Whereas if you're going to listen from a more empathic point of view to understand the person, this is what's going to jump up. Horrible is a really strong word. This person's suffering. You know, someone stuck a knife in there. That's a powerful metaphor. This person feels like they're being attacked, like they've been seriously damaged. They don't know what they do that keeps injuring it. They're worried, they're afraid, and they want information. They want to understand this. The fact that it's making them feel irritable with their kids could be the biggest impact this is having on their life. You know, I had this a couple of years ago. I hurt my back in the gym, and for a few weeks I couldn't throw my daughter up in the air. And that was our thing. That was how we bonded. That was how we played. And it killed me that I could just holding her for more than a minute was really, really struggling. And I started to feel like a bad dad really quickly. And if somebody could come along and say, I can take care of that for you. I can get you back to having a strong back so you can play with your daughter and throw her up in the air and feel like a good dad again. I'd give it whatever. I'd beg, borrow, and steal whatever I had to get that treatment, if that's what it. Now, luckily, being a chiropractor, I already knew what to do. I already had colleagues who could help me out. But if you can demonstrate to people you want to get them back to what they really want, that's so much more powerful than anything you can recommend otherwise. So this is just to show you about some things that might be more important than them. And these are the things I would listen for, first of all. You're still going to get the diagnostic info, but this way you can really better connect and show you understand what it's like to be them. So we're going to talk a little bit more about listening now. So I like to think of this, there's different ways of framing this. I quite like when we're talking about how you listen, this 4 levels model. We've got the bottom level, not very good listening, top level, excellent listening, what we should all be aiming for when we're in our practice with our patients. And at home, the great thing with communication, especially listening, you don't just use this with your patients. Use this with your friends, with your family, with your partners. You know, you can all go and practice now. Joe is talking about what are you going to do to hit the ground running and what can you do now to really manifest the practice you want when you get back. I would say a part of that is practice communication now. And this stuff has improved my marriage. It will improve the quality of those relationships. So don't think this is just something you do with patients. So starting at the bottom, passive listening. Robert Downey Jr. gives us a really good example of this. If you're in a relationship, you've had this conversation. You've had that comment. You may have given that comment before. Maybe you're on your phone, like, yeah, whatever, dear. Don't do that. I would say don't ever do that. It's just, it never pays off for anybody there. So that's the bottom one. The next one up, a little bit better, self-referential listening. So that's a great story. I've got a similar one, but mine's better because I get to talk. I'm really guilty of this sometimes if I'm not careful. This is the listening where you're listening to wait until you get to say something. So somebody's talking about their holiday and you're thinking, oh, great, then I'll tell them about my holiday. My holiday was even better. Probably not in the first visit, but you can slip into this during regular table talk when you're making conversation with patients as well. It's better than passive listening, but it's still all about you. The next one, and this is where we start getting into some more useful listening. This is analytical listening. I'm not going to play this video now for time, but have a look at it later on the slides, or if you just Google It's Not About the Nail. If you haven't seen this video, it's great. It's only a few minutes, and it's a really good example. Connor's looking like he's seen this already, I think. It's a really good example of the difference between really listening to understand the person or the problem. One person's trying to explain the problem to feel understood, and her partner is trying to understand the problem and just fix the problem. And we can get stuck in this if we're not careful as chiropractors, because we do want to analyze that problem. We want to solve the patient's issue. And that's good, and we can do that. But the problem is you start looking at the person as like a means to an end. They're just a problem to solve. So it's not somewhere you want to spend all your time. The top level, this is where we get into what's called active or reflective listening. Carl Rogers, who is a big pioneer, he's one of the big psychotherapists in the 20th century. This quote here really explains it, that we don't really listen to understand. People think they're listening more often than they actually are. And what he found, and he built a whole approach, a whole school of therapy around this, was that just listening to people fully, being really present and paying attention to what they're saying to understand them, he was getting results through this without having to do anything. It's a really powerful motivator for change. And although we're not seeing people for therapy, we've probably all had patients, I know I have, where actually just letting them talk through the impact this is having on their life, that's allowed them to really understand the problem better. And it's often therapeutic for people. I won't go too much into this now. There's a study where they asked patients about difficult childhood experiences in a GP surgery. They just filled out a questionnaire like, You know, it could range from stuff like abuse to parents were divorced, parent was ill, separated from their parents. And then when they went in, the GP looked at it and they picked one. I said, oh, do you want to talk about this a little bit? And some people, you know, they hadn't talked about this issue their entire life, 30, 40, 50 years. They never talked about it to anyone. And they found that was really powerful. And it stayed with them. They followed them up months later, and people went, that was amazing to be able to talk about that. I've never spoken to another person about what happened there. And it really helped them process it. And we can do that in smaller levels, even though we're not therapists and we're not treating that sort of thing. Just the impact chronic pain has on people. They often, by talking it through, they get to actually understand it, and it can really help them connect better with you and understand their own problem better. The problem is this is really difficult. I'm trying to be a good listener, but you keep breaking my concentration by talking. And when, particularly at the start, it can be tricky to do this. And it's something that I don't spend all my time in active reflective listening with patients. It's really hard to do. What I find is you tend to flip between two levels. So if I'm trying hard, I'll try to stay in active listening, and then I'll slip back down to analytical a bit, and then I might come back up into active. But the aim to get yourself high, you want to be doing that rather than doing lower down in the levels. So now I don't have time to go through all of this. I could talk for hours about active reflective listening. There's a webinar here. If you follow that link I did with Rhiannon and Philippa Oakley a few weeks ago, if you haven't seen that, that's one of the big topics. It's all about how to better connect and communicate with patients and how to make them feel heard. So that's worth checking out as well. We go into a lot more detail on that. So there's other ways we can break down why we listen, what we're listening for as well, different ways of listening. Another model I like is where's our focus? So what are we trying to do? Now, I like to think of this, it's like sliders on like a music mixing board where you're adjusting the different tones and things. So one example would be critical or expansive listening, which I think of as better is like big picture listening, expansive, like holistic, or fine details. So you look at this picture, and if you're focusing critically, if you're looking at it critically, you might say there's 2 cows, there's 3 sheep, there's a tree on the right hand side, 3 clouds in the sky, the cows are brown and white with spots, there's a church in the background. You're picking out the specific details. Looking at it expansively would be, it's a nice farmyard scene, it looks like a nice day, it looks quite peaceful, it looks rural, you know, the animals seem quite happy and content. You're describing the entire picture with it in one go. And what you'll probably find is you tend to bias towards critical. You tend to shift there automatically as a chiropractor because you're trying to find the specific details. And that is important. I'm not saying this is good, this is bad, but it's good to try to shift yourself expansive a bit as well. We want to be able to have a range here and to adjust that during the consult and for the patient in front of us. So I would say try to listen a bit more expansively first, try to get the whole picture, and then you can zoom down and you can focus on the critical details once you've got the overall image. Because otherwise what can happen, if you get too critical straight away, it would be like looking at this and just focusing on the cows and the sheep, and you miss the fact that there's all these clouds over here, there's these fields in the background, there's people and houses in the background. And that's where you end up missing the fact that the patient had an operation, and you find that out 2-3 visits down the line. They tell you about this massive knee injury they had, and you're thinking, why didn't you tell me that before? It's probably because you focus on the other elements too quick. Patients tend to leave stuff out because they're worried about wasting your time. And if you just hone in with lots of quick close questions, it just gives that impression that you need to get through this quickly, and they'll start to leave things out. And we all know patients aren't qualified to make that decision. So the other way is empathetic versus analytic. So that's kind of your intention. Again, it's like, are you listening to understand what it feels like to be this person? Or are you listening to work out the nature of the problem? And again, you want to shift these, and it will be different for different people in front of you. If I've got somebody who's like, they head up a top law firm, they're a type A driven, no nonsense kind of person. They just come in, oh, this is my problem, I want you to fix it. I'm not going to be going, oh, so how does that make you feel? Tell me about the emotional impact on it. You know, it's just going to wind them up. So you don't pick one set for everybody, but you want to have that ability to move that range. Like I say, it's like changing the levels on a piece of music. You can listen to the same track, but you might, for one person, decide we're going to whack the bass up high, we'll bring the treble down a little bit. And then maybe later in the consult, we're going to shift that. For another person, they might like it a different way. It's the same song, but it's just different aspects that you're highlighting. So the other thing when we're listening is what we're listening for. Now, I like to break this down into 3 levels. There's different ways of doing it. But the things I'm really listening for when a patient's in front of me, firstly, I'm listening for the words they use. Now, I get specific with this. I want to know exactly what they've said, any adjectives, any descriptive words, any metaphors, and I write them down exactly. My new patient form that I fill out has a section for each of these 3. And I write the words down exactly. The reason I say that is because you might think 2 words are the same, but you don't know that the patient does. Now, I used to think sharp, shooting, stabbing all meant the same thing, and I would use those interchangeably with me and with patients. I had a patient a couple of years ago who's a police officer, and he was talking about this sharp shooting pain he was getting in his back. And he just volunteered this. He said, it's not a stabbing pain. People think being stabbed is a sharp pain. It's not. When somebody stabs you, it's a thump. You don't feel sharp pain. He actually knew this firsthand. He'd had this happen to him. So if I then later on started saying, okay, so tell me about that sharp pain you got, or tell me about that stabbing pain you got, and I mix them round, he's going to think I haven't listened. Same with horrible, terrible, awful. I think they're the same thing. They all describe something awful. But if you use the wrong one with a patient, they might feel like you haven't listened and understood. So I write that down exactly. That's where I get specific with it. Any metaphors, like I'm stabbed in the neck, it's like I've been hit around the head with a baseball bat. Again, I write those down specifically, and they go at the top of my notes. So on our system, when I bring up that patient's file, it has those exact words there at the top. So when I'm asking them about that, I can use the exact words to show them how well I listen. It's a really good way to build that trust. Next thing I'm listening for, emotions. Now, some people will volunteer this. They'll tell you how it's making them feel afraid, or how they're really frustrated and angry that this has come on. Other people, you'll have to dig a little bit. Now, you can, with some people, ask, how's it feel having this? But the questions I get a lot of the time from chiropractors are, how do I deal with somebody who doesn't want to go into that, or who's quite resistant, or it just doesn't seem the type of person who wants to talk about it? For them, what I'd suggest is that talk to them, listen to them really well, and after a few minutes, you'll start to get a feeling. You'll start to be able to guess, you know what, this sounds like they're really frustrated by this. And then tell them your guess. You're not telling them this is what you feel like, but you're saying, for example, it sounds like this is really frustrating you, or I imagine that must be really getting you down. And when you put it like that, you're telling them, this is a suggestion I've got. This is an idea I have. I might be right or wrong. So it's fine to be wrong. Hopefully what happens is you got it right. And they go, wow, it is really frustrating actually. And they go, God, Chris is amazing. He knows just what it's like to be me. He didn't have to tell me that. And if not, and often this will happen, and this happens to me all the time as well, is they'll go, no, it's not really frustrating. I'm just worried about the future. Like I'm worried what it's going to be like next month and next year. It's just going to get worse. So they'll correct you, but they won't do it in an annoyed way because you've made it clear that this was just a guess. So you'll get the right answer either way with this. You don't have to worry about getting it wrong. And if the thing with all of this, if you're really listening well and your intention is to understand their experience, what it's like to be them, they will forgive you almost any mistake along the way because they know your heart's in the right place. Sounds a bit wishy-washy. I promise you it's true. So don't be afraid of guessing that. If you're hitting a bit of a roadblock, just make a suggestion. The last one is their goals. Now, I could spend all day talking about this. This is something I'm really passionate about. But essentially, it's trying to find out, what does the patient want to get back to? What has this problem taken away from their life? And it might be not being able to throw their daughter up in the air and their ability to feel like a good dad. It might be they like to play tennis on the weekend with their friends and it's hit their social life. It might be it's a little just niggling ache, and it doesn't stop them doing anything. But when they sit down at the end of the day, they're never totally relaxed. It's just there nagging away. It could be something, we think fairly innocuous like that. But finding out where it's impacting their life, if you can get that and you can explain your care in the way of, here's what I'm going to do to help you get back to that, it's much more powerful than any explanation about chiropractic can help give you a fully functioning spine. It can give you a fully functioning nervous system. It can bring you much more from out of disease towards health and wellness. I'm not knocking that, but your patients will never be as interested in that as you getting them back what they want. So finding that out, what impact is this having on their life? What can't they do that they used to be able to do? If you can frame your care to get them that, you've got that buy-in automatically with it. You don't have to worry about these long explanations. I'm not against explaining that. I'm really not. But you'll find it's a lot easier if you can do that. Now, I'm planning a future webinar on this as well. So if you go onto the patient-centered Facebook page, I'll announce things there. Depends on timing with kids and things like that. But this is something that if you focus on, it can really, really help build that trust, because they know that you're after what they want. You know, you're trying to help them get to their goal. So how are we doing for time there, guys? I know I've run on a little bit with that. We're okay? So just quickly, the last thing I want to do is just go through a few common mistakes that I see. Now, I say this out of experience. I have made all these mistakes myself. So don't think this is me being critical and going, this is what you should be doing. This is stuff I've had to learn from personal experience. One of the first ones is relying on closed questions. The webinar I mentioned before, the ORS webinar with the link, you'll see what we mean more here. Closed questions are like yes, no questions. Does it do this or this? Does it hurt there or there? Is it better morning, afternoon, or evening? You've limited the answers there. They're important. They have their place. I'm not saying they're bad, but try to use more open questions. Open questions are ones that allow the person to surprise you. If the answer has the potential to surprise you or the patient, it's an open question. And that's great for building more trust and empathy. So especially at the very start, I focus more on open questions. Now I save the closed questions for a bit later on. Tactics. So of course I'm listening to your expression of spiritual suffering. Can't you see I'm making eye contact? I'm striking an open posture. I'm leaning towards you and nodding empathetically. You know, I'm doing all the right things. Tactics are basically little things that you think about, like, oh, now I'll do this, now I'll do that. I'll mirror their body language. Now's a good time to lean in and pause dramatically. I'm not a big fan of them. They work to a degree, but then you hit a brick wall, because what they do is they take you out of the experience. You cannot listen properly to somebody when you're thinking about yourself. It doesn't work. If you focus on really being present with them and practicing more active listening and not getting stuck in the analytical frame of mind, this stuff comes naturally. You will start using the right body language. It's pretty instinctual. The problem is our brains just get in the way. People who are socially awkward, if they're introverted and shy, they really struggle with this, because they go to a party, they're interacting with people, and they're so worried about how they look and about how other people might be judging them and they might make a fool of themselves. They get stuck in this tactic thing. Oh, should I have laughed there? Was that a bit too loud? Should I say something? Oh, maybe I embarrassed myself. Maybe they didn't like that. And the solution of this has actually come out of research. If you're socially awkward, the key is to just put all your focus on the other person. Just really try and listen to them and pay attention to them as much as you can. And you don't end up getting reliant on these tactics. So that's a little bonus if you struggle with big groups or things like that. But actually just focusing on the person, you can skip a lot of these tactics. Strategies are good. Like a strategy would be, I'm going to really listen to understand what it's like to be them. I want to find out what's missing from their life. The tactics you'll start to bring in automatically with that. Assumption is the evil mother of all mistakes. It's really easy to assume you've listened well and that you've got it right. Don't assume that. I check back with patients often that I've got stuff right. I'm not saying, is that right? Is that right? Is that right? But I'm just reflecting back, and we cover this in the other webinar as well. I'm just reflecting back what I've heard from them. And it's constantly, they tell me something, I hear that, I tell them what I think I heard. They go, yeah, that's it, or no, and they correct it. And we have this constant back and forth. Summarizing is a really easy way to do that. You take a patient, you've taken their history, you think you've got pretty much everything you need to know. And I go, right, before we move on, I'm just going to run through what I heard, because I want to make sure I've got this right. And I give them a quick summary of it. And they hopefully most of the time go, nope, that was great, didn't miss anything. Or they might go, oh, I should have mentioned, actually there's this as well. And sometimes they'll correct themselves. They'll go, yeah, I know I said it's worse when I do that. Actually, no, it's worse when I do this. Gives them an opportunity to help correct it as well. If you do that in the first visit, fine. If you do it later on, if visits 2, 3, 4, if you repeat something back they told you and it's not quite right, then it's your fault. That will feel like you didn't listen to them. So don't assume you've got it right. Check back with your patients as well, just to make sure. And rushing. This is, I know a lot of people, they talk about how quick they can do a new patient visit, how little time they need to spend on the history. I'm not saying you have to sit down and have a cup of tea and make, you know, small talk for 20 minutes to connect with the patient. But if you rush it, it just doesn't work. You just don't get that connection. You don't get that buy-in. What I used to be able to do a new patient in 45 minutes. I still can, but I book myself an hour because it means that I'm never clock watching. Because the second you start thinking, oh, I need to wrap this up because we've got to get through some stuff and then the next patient's in at 2, it's just taking you out. You've disconnected and you will struggle to build trust in the same way. Best case scenario, you get really, really good at hiding it, but it's just not a nice energy state for you to be in, and it's not nice for the patient either. So if you can allow yourself a little bit of flexibility there, it can really help. It stops you interrupting. Research has shown that doctors, GPs interrupt people anything 7 to 20 seconds into it. And that just tells the patient you're not interested in what they have to say. They're wasting your time. Hopefully as chiropractors, I like to think we're a lot better. But even then, there's still, I see tactics being passed around of like, here's how to interrupt somebody. Here's how to make it clear that you need to talk about other things. You can still control that conversation, and the reflective listening is a good way to do that. But if you can allow yourself a little bit of extra time, just so you can be a lot more relaxed. Yes, you might treat one less patient after it. Book it next to a lunch break. You know, you can. I know people who they tell their staff, only book me new patients before a lunch break. So if you finish early, you've got a longer lunch. For me, often I've got, 5, 10, 15 minutes left at the end. I just use that to catch up on a few notes or a bit of admin. You can still be just as productive with that, but not trying to rush it, not trying to get through that as quick as possible. The other thing with this is I found I don't have to spend nearly as much time explaining at subsequent visits. My report of findings is shorter. I spend less time going over things in future visits. I actually spend less time with that patient over the course of their care by front loading it a little bit at the start. So you end up being more efficient this way as well. If you rush it, those are the people who are asking visit 2, visit 3, visit 4. Oh, but what about this? Oh, so hang on, what are you doing there? Is this actually helping? They're the ones you get annoyed with because they keep asking the same questions and you think they haven't listened. It's because they haven't felt heard. So just be aware of that. And if you can, try to factor in just a little bit of padding so you know you've got that time there. All right. Now, I'm not going to go into this now for time. 12 roadblocks. This is Thomas Gordon. He was a student of Carl Rogers. He described 12 inappropriate responses when you're listening to somebody with a problem. I promise you, you will be doing some of these. Everybody does. They're pretty much automatic. They're not all wrong all the time. One of them, for example, is giving advice. He's not saying you shouldn't ever give advice, but sometimes it can be inappropriate. Somebody hasn't finished telling you what's wrong. You want to jump in and solve the issue. It can interrupt that connection. So have a look at the link there. You'll see and you'll know the ones that apply to you. It's great if you can show a loved one that and go, which one of these do I do? Because they'll often spot ones that you didn't realize you were doing. They're not all wrong, but be aware of the ones you slip into automatically. And then you can start to use them consciously. So I try to humor things a lot. If it gets a bit awkward or a bit deep, I want to make light of it and make a joke of it. That's sometimes appropriate, but I make sure I do it consciously now. Before I let it automatically come out, I stop and go, is this the right time and place for that kind of response? So have a look at that, because I guarantee that will help. It'll help all your relationships. You point that out, your other half points that out to you because you do this a lot and you work on that. Happy relationship. So like I say, this isn't just stuff for patients here. But you can read that at your own leisure a bit later on there. Okay, so that's pretty much wrap things up for me there. If you do want to connect with me later on, I'll be posting these resources up on my page later on Facebook as well. You can find it there. Get in touch if you try this stuff and you hit a roadblock or you get stuck with anything. Message me. I'm more than happy to chat through some stuff through Facebook. You can shoot me an email as well. I'm around now if there's any questions as well. But otherwise, that pretty much covers everything there. So yeah, thanks for attending, everybody. Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Connor, for having me. It's great to be back on lines again. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. All right, I'm just going to get you back on normal screen. There we go. Yes, thank you so much for coming on today. That was great, as always, from you. We always appreciate your work and efforts. And the same goes for Chris. He was scheduled to come in on Monday, had made plans with his family. And was very grateful. We were very grateful for him being able to be adaptable and come on today to share everything with us.
And my daughter hasn't burst in here as well, which is a
yeah.
I've only got the one, so I haven't got Joe's 4 excuse, but yeah.
Great. There was one question, sorry, it was regarding from Angelica saying about how whenever you're talking about someone about their goals, how do you make it clear that you're not promising them that they're going to be able to throw their daughter up in the air if it isn't potentially possible? Limitation.
Okay, so like dealing with that uncertainty there.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I wouldn't make promises. So I wouldn't say, yes, we'll definitely get you back to that if we don't know. But you can say you're confident. If you genuinely believe your care, what you can do for them, gives them the best chance of getting back to that, communicate that. If you don't think that, then you maybe want to work on that. Sometimes we don't really believe that, either because we don't have the self-confidence like Joe was talking about, or maybe you do want to brush up on your skills. So think about that first of all. But otherwise, if you genuinely think that, communicate that. I'll say to patients that, look, this is what you've got going on. This is what I can do to help you. This is what you can do to help you. And if we work together over this time, I'm confident that we're going to get you back to playing golf again. We're going to get you back to throwing your daughter up in the air. Another thing I do as well is I sometimes talk about early on, like shorter time frames. I might say, I'd recommend we start working together for the next 3 months. And over those 3 months, I expect to get you 50 to 75% of a full recovery. Now, 100% is likely to take longer, but you should be getting back to playing golf all during that time. Great. So you can say it with all the certainty and confidence that you have. I'm not making any promises there, but I'm saying from a confident point of view, this is what I expect. And you can add in, based on my experience with many other cases, with many other people who've had the exact same issue. So you can kind of butter it up a little bit with that as well. But you're being totally honest with that. And you can address the uncertainty, but still give them that confidence. And again, if you've really listened to them, they'll be much more likely to have that confidence in you as well. So yeah, that's how I tend to phrase it. Rather than, you don't want to make promises that you can't guarantee.
Great. And then we also had a question about unrealistic goals. How do you manage expectation with unrealistic goals?
Okay, so the 70-year-old who wants to run the London Marathon. You got to be a bit careful with this because I think Philippa mentioned this in the webinar. Is that she said you don't get to take goals off the table, and I think that's really important. That it can be tempting to go, oh, I don't think they can do that. I better let them down now. I don't be that doctor. Don't be that chiropractor who said, yeah, you're never going to be able to go running again. Because if you say that, you've just guaranteed it. That person will never run for the rest of their life. And we all know people who the doctor said, I'd never be able to do this again. And then I did. It's that you can be wrong. You might be wrong about that. So don't take it. I'd be very, very careful about taking stuff off the table. If they say, I want to run the London Marathon next week, then we need to have a conversation about, okay, my experience is that's very unlikely. I still say it's possible. You might be one of the rare cases where 1 or 2 visits, you respond really quickly. But my expectation is you're not going to be ready for that in that time. It's going to take longer to get you there. The other thing you can break it down is go, okay, well, let's work together for the first month, or whatever you're comfortable. And let's start by aiming to get you, they want to run a marathon. Let's get you running a 5K. Let's start with that. And you're not really saying yes or no, you can do that marathon, but you're starting with a smaller version of it if you think that's realistic. So it's a good thing often to break the goals down into smaller, more manageable chunks. But I would be open to being wrong. I've definitely had patients that I thought, they'll never do that. And they've proved me wrong. You're never going to be 100% right. So I'd be very cautious about that. But yeah, so don't take it off the table, but sometimes you might have to revise those expectations or say you'd expect it to take longer. But the great thing is with health is that everybody knows that everyone responds differently. So you can say, my experience is most patients are going to take longer to get you there. But it's possible you might do that. You may walk out of here feeling 10 times better already, but most patients take a bit longer. So you've left the hope on the table there without unrealistically pumping it up, if that makes sense.